Hi, everyone. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane.
Welcome to the musical Innertube, the podcast born out of a mistake.
We once meant to introduce a soothing musical interlude, but we said soothing musical Innertube, and the name stuck.
On this podcast, we talk to interesting people about their interesting lives, jobs, hobbies, and passions.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
Ladies and gentlemen, once again, we welcome back to the podcast one of our more frequent guests, Art Caplan, medical ethicist, essayist. I'm sure you've read some of his great things in so many places. Welcome back to the musical Innertube.
I have to keep reappearing to cement my Pennsylvania connections. Well, disappear if I don't talk to you guys and find out what the heck's going on there in the Commonwealth.
Well, there's a lot going on in Pensy. In fact, we are taping this just before New Year's. And of course, in New Year's, Pennsylvania goes absolutely obliterated. And there's all this weird stuff. I was just reading that Bethlehem, Pennsylvania lowers a gigantic heap. You know, those.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, those marshmallow chicks.
Yeah. And Hershey lowers a huge kiss.
Uh-huh.
And
So funny.
And there's a place just south of Harrisburg called Dillsburg that lowers a pickle.
A pickle.
Because it's Dillsburg. So,
And Kennett Square lowers a 700-pound steel mushroom.
And what does intercourse lower?
Your blood pressure.
Yeah.
No, actually, I think it raises mine. But anyway, so there's plenty to do on New Year's Eve, folks. You should go out and see the true nuttiness of Pennsylvania New Year's Eve. And there's really lots of fun things that go on. There's one town out near Jim Thorpe, which changes for 3 weekends in December to Bedford Falls. I mean, really changes.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It really
yeah.
looks
Cool.
like it. And Bedford Falls, for those who don't know, is the town that It's a Wonderful Life happens in.
Jimmy Stewart.
So, but this town remakes itself exactly. It's crazy.
That's really funny.
I want to go running down that main street saying, "Hi, you old savings and loan."
Well, that savings and loan was bought by Goldman Sachs and sold out to venture capitalists from Oman years ago. It's not there anymore.
So, Art, you are a leading figure in the medical ethics movement in this country, certainly in the world, and you've been thinking about these things. And so I want to ask you, it's the new year coming up, or Hannukah. If you got a Hannukah present and it was this, what would you say? So the Hannukah present is a little piece of paper that says it will be granted to you that the things you really want to have happen in the field of medical ethics will happen in 2025, and those that you don't want will not. So let's start with the things you'd like to see happen.
Well, this is much better than getting that rotten dreidel, which I got for some 20 years.
But we made it out of clay.
You know, the funny thing about Hannukah, and then I will answer your question, is that it is an absolutely minor holiday of no particular significance. It just grew steroidally because it falls around Christmas. So it was the fallback for the Jews who felt left out or miffed or something that they couldn't get a Christmas tree. But if we went back a few thousand years and said to Jews, "What's this Hannukah thing?" They say, "I have no idea. It's just some battle. I don't know. It's some stupid. There's no significance whatsoever to anything." All right. But nonetheless, it has significance here because one thing I could get is presents for 7 days.
Yes. Ooh.
So that could be a big list. I'll tell you, first on my list of things that I would hope we get is finding some way to replace advance directives, those written things we tell you to fill out about guiding your end of life care, well, however you want to do it, with "I don't want it," or "I want a lot," or "I only want things if I'm cognitively with it," or "I'll take everything and hope for a miracle." The reality is they don't work. People don't fill them out. When they do fill them out, they stick them in their drawer in their office and they don't get to the hospital. Even when they get to the hospital, they're usually very old somebody might fill it out when they're 60. And by the time they're 80 and need it to guide their care, all the doctors are like, well, do you think they still mean it? It's 20 years. Should we follow that? So something to replace that. My suggestion might be everybody register online, have a computer thing that reminds you to update it. By the way, I've seen people show up at the hospital and somebody come in and say, I'm speaking for Don, and it turns out to be his former ex-wife, which can be maybe not the best spokesperson in the situation, but I've seen it myself.
Yes.
And so that would be first wish. Replace living wills, advanced directives with more effective tools. We still have too much going on at the end of life where people get things they don't want, or people don't get things they do want, or families are still fighting, and we could do better. We could do better. So maybe...
Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Does an ex-wife or ex-spouse, I should say, count as a survivor? Do we know this?
What you mean in the legal sense of controlling property and so on?
Yes.
No, they don't. Now, you can still pick them. I mean, there are amicable divorces, and people do it when they have kids in common and say, she can control the money and send them to school and all. It's not that it never happens, but you got to make a special provision for it.
I could imagine too that somebody at 60 years old or 50 years old fills out one of these things, puts down their current wife, has a divorce, remarries, goes into the hospital 20 years later. They open it up. The contact is the ex-wife. That would lead to that.
All the time. All the time. So once you do it, you don't really go back, and you're not nagged or reminded to, which electronically you could get an email or a text saying it's time to just check in. You still want, Art as your decision maker, that kind of thing. Related to this, another end-of-life care miserable situation. I would like to see us fix hospice. Hospice is a great idea. And for those who forgot, hospice is you go into palliative care, meaning emotional and physical support of pain and suffering. However, when you go into a hospice, you have to agree to do no more efforts at therapy. In other words, you're saying, I'm done, just take care of me and don't let me suffer, to put it bluntly. Well, there are a lot of new drugs coming out, things that aren't yet FDA approved. Jimmy Carter had a drug that helped him live probably 10 more years with cancer that wasn't even approved when he first got it. We have to relax the rules of hospice to let people chase last-ditch drugs if they want to use them, not tell them, nope, can't get it, you're in hospice, sorry, you signed away any ability to get this. And a cousin issue to this is there are too many for-profit hospices that aren't doing the job. A lot of these private equity venture places have seen this as a very lucrative area. They get involved and make money, but they short staff and they don't train properly. And hospice is a great idea. And when it works well, it's great, by the way, if you're a person who opposes medically assisted dying or physician assisted suicide, letting the doctor give somebody pills to end their life. Your best argument is beefing up hospice, because people, what they're afraid of is that they're going to suffer at the end of life. If you tell them you'll take care of them and they'll have a dignified, emotionally supported end, they won't choose to exit early. Most people have no interest in exiting early.
I have an interest in Don exiting early. So
goodbye, John.
That's what my wife says. She will not make me her decision maker. She fears I am too quick on the plug ball. It's a little. So that's a second wish. And again, in the end of life care space. A third wish, that we once and for all agree that if RFK Jr. becomes head of Health and Human Services or doesn't, someone else will take on that office with similar views. Trump has made it clear that we stop arguing that vaccines need to have proof that they're safe and efficacious. They do have proof. The polio vaccine, when it was introduced, was actually studied in 2 million children. And you can even argue about whether that study was ethical, because I'm not sure the consent was all that great. But they studied them and found out that it worked, found out that there were, I don't know, a tiny number of cases where polio was communicated by the new vaccine, but it was studied. And then they began from the 50s to now to make safer versions of that. We don't have to study the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine anymore. We know it doesn't cause autism. We don't have to really study the hepatitis B vaccine. There's a slew of these that critics and doubters and skeptics, including RFK Jr., say, well, I'm not opposed to vaccines. I just want them studied. That's bogus. And I wish it would just go away. It is not what we need these days. I see whooping cough cases breaking out in Pennsylvania. Measles is bouncing around already. That's not the way to go. So I wish that would just end. I don't think it's good for kids. And we have one vaccine for cervical cancer called the HPV vaccine. 2 countries, Australia, and I guess Scotland isn't technically a country, but part of the Great Britain, Scotland, have eliminated cervical cancer because of an aggressive vaccination program. That's a cancer vaccine. We should be following that on arguing about whether vaccines are safe. They wiped out a very nasty cancer. A lot of women still in the U.S. get cervical cancer, picked up on a pap smear. They have to have operations. Some die. I think 4,000 a year die from it. Boy, that's inexcusable. So that's a wish that would stop deprecating vaccines. They work, they're safe, kids need them, we should get them. Another big wish I would have, I hope we don't drop out of the WHO. The new president incoming says he wants to get us out of there. He's mad because he has this view that we fund it and pay too much for it. He's right. We do fund it, and we probably do pay too much for it, but we get our money's worth because all of the work that they do to stop diseases and problems in other countries benefits us. Not the least of which, if you help people not get sick where they live, then they're less inclined to want to move to where you live. So if you don't like immigration, a nice thing to do would be to beef up the healthcare system to a minimal level in a lot of these countries. WHO tries to do that. That's the mission. They certainly are very active in trying to help out with aid in places like Ukraine and Gaza and Sudan. Whatever we're putting in to support them, it's peanuts. I mean, it's nothing. Elon Musk has that much money in his couch.
Yeah.
It fell out of his pocket, whatever the WHO cost is. So I hope we don't do that. I think that would just be short-sighted. As Ben Franklin said, it would be penny wise, pound foolish kind of problem. I hope we don't do that. I think that's 4. A 5th one I might urgently go for as my Hannukah gift. I'd say we need to do more testing, home care testing for things like the flu and diseases like colds. If we could develop better test kits, then don't go out, don't go to school, all that terrible fighting we had about closing the schools. And I'm not myself convinced that was worth it, so to speak, in terms of preventing kids from getting sick or teachers getting sick. But whether it was or it wasn't, if you know who's sick from things, then you can treat them and also ask them not to go running around in public places, and you don't have to lock everybody else up. This old school idea that dominated CDC and public health thinking, you have a disease, quarantine the sick. Well, if there's like millions of people who are sick, you can't we learned you can't quarantine the whole society. They hate it. They're mad. They can't go to work. They can't take care of the kids. I don't think that homeschooling by Zoom turned out to be a big plus. I think a lot of kids just fell behind or didn't do it. But if you had testing, then your kid's sick, don't go to school. You're sick, don't go to the movies. and everybody else gets more freedom.
This would be kind of like the COVID testing that we have now.
Correct. Just expand.
You would just put a swab in there and it would tell you whether or not you had the flu.
Correct.
Okay.
We need more testing for these infectious diseases, because even if you can't cure them, at least you know who's got it and who you need to keep an eye on, and everybody else doesn't have to have their freedom restricted. I mean, I think that legacy of locking up societies and locking down the schools and job losses and restaurants closing and all that stuff, that really was a huge price to pay for what I'm going to say was some control, but not great control of the spread. You got to do better. And I think the path is testing. I think testing gets you more freedom in terms of others who aren't sick or not infected being able to keep doing whatever it is that they want to do. I got a sixth one in the news a lot. I would pull cell phones out of schools. Now, there's a bigger debate going on about whether cell phones are transmitting dangerous content to kids, pornography or a means of bullying and harassment. One of my colleagues at NYU, Jonathan Haidt, wrote a book about this, basically saying they are, and it's called The Anxious Generation. And he argues, we should never let these kids get near cell phones. And I think he would probably not let them get near much of the internet either. Australia just banned cell phone use for kids, I believe, under 18, but you can't have one. Parents tell me they're very nervous. They don't want their kid at school without a cell phone. They have to call if there's an emergency, to which my response is two things. One, you do what I did in school, which is you had to go to the principal's office to call your parents. Now, that's slower, but you could do it. Or you could give them a phone and let them make emergency calls. I'm not against that. There's limited phones, but having a kid with a phone in school, scrolling around, paying no attention, boy, I don't know if it's corroding their minds, but it's not the place to use it at school. So I'd like to see that ban go into effect. I'm not anti TikTok and I'm not anti the internet, even though it's full of misinformation and disinformation, but not in school. Not in school. I always used to get a little irritated when I taught med students and they'd open up their computers while I was giving a lecture. And you're like, you're not paying attention here, buddy. So if you don't want to pay attention, you have to show up. But don't sit here in front of me and not pay attention. That's irritating. You're like irritating me. That's not going to go well for you later. So that would be one in the social sphere. Last one, and I'll give a little shout out here. You know what Donald Trump and RFK Jr. and I agree on? Get the direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical ads off TV. I know RFK Jr. doesn't like them. He and I don't like them for quite the same reason. He thinks they're just promoting too much pharmaceutical solutions to your health. I'm not sure that's exactly what's wrong, but they certainly do no good in terms of informing anybody about anything. I keep laughing every time I see one of these ads that comes on and says, we've got zitomidofridasosin. So if you have type 4 genetic stomach cancer, this is for you. It's like,
that does not respond to aspirin and beer.
Yeah.
On days that end with Y. You get the small print in the...
my favorite part is when they read the small print. This could cause severe stomach distress, diarrhea, and possible death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I'll tell you what my favorite part is of these things. So ask your doctor about X.
Yes.
Well, if you have to go ask your doctor about X, you need a new doctor. I mean, if the doctor's supposed to be a specialist in cancer, you're going to come in and say, I saw on TV there's this ad for this cancer drug. Do you ever hear of it? Do you think we should try it? It's like, what are you talking about? And no other country really permits this. I know that they're spending tons of money on it, the pharmaceutical companies.
Sure. Because they spent tons of money research, doing
the R&D.
The R&D. So,
One of my favorite things too, and that in the little cautionary thing that they say is, don't take it if you're allergic to Visnovi. Well, how do you know you're allergic until you take it and have a reaction?
How do you
You know
know
you're
that?
allergic when you're on the floor calling the ambulance.
With a rapidly closing throat. It's just like, let me ask you a question. And that I think a lot of us would say those commercials run the gamut from being highly embarrassing to, I mean, there's something odd about some of the commercials, the way that they sort of image the good life. I mean, they're just an odd, weird commercial, and then or to really irritating. So from embarrassing to irritating, did the law change? Because there was a time when you couldn't have commercials like that.
It did. There was, I forget the name of the case, but proponents, for lawyers of the pharmaceutical industry, won cases that you can't intrude on their speech. And it was tied up to John's favorite case, Citizens United, which gave corporations personhood standing so they can speak. And so if you have free speech plus your corporation is a person, then you've got a free speech talking pharmaceutical company. So yes, it was through legal challenge. But the point is, it's not free speech. They're not telling you, they're marketing products. Who's kidding who? This is not I have these views about whether vanilla is better than chocolate or something. This is marketing.
Oh my goodness.
It's ridiculous. By the way, I hate Citizens United. This whole idea that companies give money and act as persons.
Well, now the
ridiculous.
personhood standing of corporations goes back to a very early, sort of devil's bargain in the history of the Constitution. That was, it's sort of hard to extirpate that now. It's baked into the stuff. This happened in the early 19th century when it was ruled that corporations should have the same standing as people and be subject to, have access to the same protections. I'm not defending it. I'm just noting it's sort of baked into the pie.
Yeah. I mean, I guess part of me wants to say, okay, then if they're really people, then let's not just give them rights and privileges. What do they get by way of obligations and duties akin to what other people have to do who are just human people? So are they obliged to take care of their employees like they would a family member, just as an example? If you want to play that game of moral standing for corporations, then they're just indulging themselves in freedoms, and no one's saying that it comes with any duties.
That's so good.
Obligations.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I think yes, human beings, we don't actually have an unlimited freedom of speech.
Right.
We don't have an unlimited freedom of anything.
Right. People were telling me during COVID, no one can intrude on my freedom. It's like, they intrude on your freedom from the time you wake up and tell you it's daylight savings time or it isn't, to when you get in your car and you got to put on your seatbelt or you can't speed or you have to follow road. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. There's rules everywhere.
I remember when seatbelts were made mandatory, there was a huge outcry that you're infringing upon my personal rights in my car that I bought. And, I remember too, when Obamacare was passed and I was working for the Senate and we were setting up a video feed and this lady came by to watch. She was going to be in the audience for this particular hearing. And she sat at a table she sat at a chair next to the table where I was setting everything up. And somebody very close to us was talking about Obamacare. I don't want, that shoved down my throat and everything. And she turned to me and she looked at me and she said, so here's a law that says we're going to give you health care when you need it and we're going to make it affordable. Why would somebody not want that? And I said, because it impinges on their ability to get sick and die or something. I don't know, but that was going around. That was a very prevalent thought.
You used to see people demonstrating against federal involvement with Obamacare who are absolutely Medicare recipients. Like, where do you think this comes from? It's like a federal subsidized program for old people. It's to say Obamacare is just extending it.
I do remember a hearing, seeing a hearing, a photo or a video where some elderly person was at a hearing or a community group or whatever, and he was holding up the sign that says, "Keep your government hands off my Medicare."
Exactly. Exactly. By the way, that reminds me of another point. Elon and Vivek there have said they want to cut $2 trillion out of the federal budget. The only way you could do that is to come against defense, which they won't, or Medicare and Social Security, because the rest of the budget isn't big enough to get you $2 trillion back, what we spend on education or scientific research or these other things. So I do have a proposal, and I know it's going to get anybody over probably 62 mad as hornets at me. But if I were those guys and I was looking to save money, I'd raise the age of eligibility for Social Security and Medicare. They were done in the 30s. People died much earlier. The demographics make no sense. You can work most jobs, not all. I know if you get a physical labor job, you can't, but a lot of jobs you could work. If you can do it at 62, you could do it at 64. They did do it in France. It drove the public nuts. I think it drove Macron, the president there, prime minister, partly out of office because people hated losing those retirement years. But I'm telling you, that's the change I would make. I wouldn't cut benefits, and I wouldn't try to do Medicare Advantage and these other privatization efforts with Medicare. I would raise the age of eligibility. It just doesn't make sense to go eligible in today's demographics.
So
we're living
where would you put the line?
65.
Mhm.
That should get them enough savings.
Yeah.
And
That's not a very big change. So that would save $2 trillion a year.
I don't know if it'd save $2 trillion, but it would save a lot of
All right.
money.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know.
Also,
And by the way, I'm not saying about current people. You'd say, look, 5 years from now, the thing is going to change. Get ready. Save more money in your, retirement account if you want to do that. We're not going to do this to anybody existing. They got a promise. We're not changing that, but we are going to change it. Literally put a clock in and alert people. This is coming. Get ready. Prepare accordingly.
Is it any surprise that the government turned the Medicare Advantage over to private industry to take care of, to insurance companies, and now we're dealing with a ton of fraud? Is there anybody that's surprised by that?
No. And the administrative cost. Medicare is about 2% of total expenditure. The VA, which is actually a giant, I shouldn't say this because they'll go try to get rid of it, but the VA probably has a 3% overhead, as a giant socialized medical system that, everybody deals with set prices and bargain prices. Private insurance overhead, 38%.
It's a breathtaking. I read something like that, a few months ago. I kind of knew it in the back of my head because it's one of the things we used to say sitting around the editorial board meetings and saying, wow, we wish that government could be, we used to just be, little jokesters. We wish government could be as efficient as private insurers, man. About a third of private insurers are managers and administrators.
Yeah.
We knew that. We knew that because we met them all the time. They were the ones who were saying, give the business to us.
Yes.
How this is supposed to save money for anyone. It actually is a guarantee that medical costs will go up more quickly than the cost of living.
Right. Well, remember the 38% number I quoted for United Healthcare and other, big insurers doesn't even include the fraud that Don is talking about. I mean, it's probably, if you add that in, it probably makes it to 45% of
geez,
waste.
yeah.
I mean, it's like absurd. And we've been playing this game with market capitalism to run healthcare for decades and decades. It doesn't work.
And, I was just going to say that very thing, Art, and thank you for saying that, because now I can tell people, kill him, not me. But I think the point that we have been fooling around with ever since the HMO laws in the early 70s and the Nixon
Oh,
era
yeah.
is that privatized medicine does not work. You can't make money doing it, and nobody in the world does it except we're trying to do it, and it just doesn't work. I don't know how you can make it work. And they say, oh, just ration care. Oh, good. Well, then it's not healthcare.
That's, by the way, that's what United Healthcare and the guy who got shot, that is their job. We have hired them to turn down requests for care. They're rationers.
Yes.
That is what they're doing.
Yep.
It doesn't seem to me they're popular at doing it. And I don't know if they do it well because there's no transparency about why they turn down something, how you appeal something. It's all a big black box in a giant corporate network.
If you lose one of those cases and you can't get it, and if you're poor, then you're a loser and no one hears from you. In other words, you don't have the bullhorn. You don't have an equal right of speech. That's not there for you. And there's a lot of,
and going back to the mainstream media, I used to try periodically to interest the Inquirer or the Boston Globe or somebody in the plight of somebody in their area who couldn't get care. And often they would respond and do a nice story on, little Joey or Miss X or whoever it is. But they're not going to do that week after week. It's not the news. You know what I mean? Their job isn't to become a kind of alternative pathway for complaints. So they give you the story of one person, and it's sad. And oftentimes that one person got a break because the companies don't like the PR and they want it to go away. But they're not going to be there's so much of this going on is what I'm trying to say. You only sniff a tiny part of it if you pick it up out of the media, because again, the media is going to get tired of just running those. You can only do so many poor little Joey stories, and then you got to move on. They won't.
Yep.
They won't do them forever.
As a bioethicist, I am assuming that you are opposed to the way Luigi took care of things with his beef with
I am.
United Healthcare.
I am. You can't have vigilantes running around doing this. Although I am going to say two things about this. One, there is a huge history in America of violence against corporate people, including trying to shoot Frick, one of the great old Gilded Age entrepreneurs, in his house. I think assassination attempts were tried on John D. Rockefeller, slew of people. I hear politicians today say all the time, well, that's not the American way to go out and try and kill, CEOs. My comment is, oh, yes, it is. And they've been doing it since they had the Homestead Steel Strike and, got into these wars between the union guys and the Pinkertons. They've been trying to blow up and kill the CEO. It's very American to be violent.
Yes.
That's my point. Very American. The other is, no, you shouldn't have to shoot this guy to get people to pay attention to what's wrong. But I fear that this will fade.
Oh, yeah.
I know it's in the news and we're all worried about, they're turning down this and it's not transparent and they're making a ton of money. We'll have to talk about this in 6 months and see if anybody remembers it.
Yeah,
So,
I really don't think that the offing of the CEO is going to change corporate anything.
No.
It's a terrible thing. It's, again, people lionize Luigi for doing what he did, and yet, and they've lionized him because of the problems they have with insurance. But it's not going to change the way insurance works. All it did was set up fences around the outside of the insurance company headquarters.
And they all pulled their pictures down and info from their websites. That's about it. And I hate to say it, but that is exactly what happened when people were trying to get the right to unionize or trying to get a shorter workday and began to attack CEOs in the 1900s. They just built up their security and pulled back into a more isolated lifestyle. That's all. The Vanderbilts went to their house in Asheville and invited their friends and built a lot of fences around it. And that was the end of that. They didn't change. So yeah, I'd like to say, well, this will trigger a discussion that'll achieve reform. I don't know.
Every year brings new discoveries in medicine, and none of them come without questions and ethical issues. So, my friend, you're going to have business for a long time.
Leave us not forget that Elon Musk has a huge effort underway to try and study the brain by implanting things into the brain. And he's doing it on people right now. It's called Neuralink. So if you like Elon Musk, then he said that cynically, how'd you like him controlling your brain directly from a computer station?
What if I could arrange for that not to happen to me? I mean, I don't want to talk out of turn here, but
yeah. Well, he'd probably protest for a while. He'd think it was cute.
So does he propose, I know that the implanting idea is going on, that he's getting volunteers and people are coming right up and go, oh yes, please. Sort of like the old box tops. Yes, please put a sensor in my brain. So do they disturb the neural network? Do they actually disturb the meat up there? How is this? How is implanting done?
Well, it's a great question. And we don't know the answer because it's completely off the books.
Trust us.
He doesn't report on it. He doesn't publish. He doesn't get it reviewed by the usual committees because it's privately funded. So there's no law. If you're funded by the NIH, you have to go through a lot more committee review and transparency. If you're a gazillionaire running your own little company, you don't have to do anything. And we don't know. I'll tell you this. When somebody goes in and has a brain stimulation treatment for Parkinsonism, and you may have heard of that, some listeners will know about that, it's a tiny, tiny needle that hits a few cells in the brain and seems to help. I've seen the size of the stuff he's putting in people's brains, and it's 1,000 times bigger. So would I imagine that it shakes up the gunk in your head? I would, but I don't know.
Oh, man, with my teeny cranium, there's a lot of room to put all sorts of crap.
Well, that's right. That's called the targeting problem. They may have to fish around for a long time where they hit something. Yeah.
All I can say is I remember reading science fiction when I was in high school, and the big thing in science fiction books and movies back then was corporates take over. Corporations take over. Exploration of space, medicine, and it was all bad. Robots were bad. When cruisers went out to Mars and blew up, nobody knew anything about it because the corporate covered it up. And that seems to be where we're headed, isn't it?
Yeah, well, Americans are much more afraid of a government owning the technology to manipulate your brain or, manipulate our future or us than they are corporations. They're more accepting of Elon Musk acting out in his profit-driven way to modify our brains than they are, say, Anthony Fauci. And I'm not sure where that all comes from, the great fear of government more than private sector capitalism. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that's right. The space program is becoming corporatized. Medicine is heavily corporatized. This brain research is heavily corporatized. And it doesn't have a lot of accountability behind it. It's just like the billionaires get to play, by their rules. So that'll create a lot of ethics dilemmas to talk about. The real problem is whether anybody's going to do anything about it. It's a separate
Could we
matter.
skip 2025 and go straight to 2000? And I don't know when the next election is. You're frightening me. That's all.
Nothing to worry about. The Borg will be here very soon. Inside joke.
There
for
you go. That's right.
Friends.
It's a neck and neck race between the Borg and the Singularity. So Art Caplan, the freewheeling slashing and burning swashbuckling Art Caplan. We have covered such wonderful territory today, and I just want to thank you. We want to have you on. One of the things that we look forward to next year is we'll have you on again.
Thanks, Art.
Very good. I enjoy it. Thanks, guys.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
Hey, let us know how we're doing. Send us an email at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
Do you know someone with a great story to tell? Let us know. Send us an email or log in to our website, musicalinnertube.com, and click on the microphone in the lower right-hand corner to leave us a voicemail.
And while you're on our website, take a few minutes to listen to past episodes of the podcast. They're all there, along with pictures and biographies of our guests, blog posts, and lots more.
And as always, our thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for providing us with our theme music.